The devil had already put it into the mind of Judas, son of Simon Iscariot, to betray him. During supper, Jesus, well aware that the Father had entrusted everything to him and that he had come from God and was going back to God, rose from the table, laid aside his garments, and taking a towel, tied it around him. Then he poured water into a basin and began to wash his disciples' feet and to wipe them with the towel. When it was Simon Peter's turn, Peter said to him, "You, Lord, washing my feet?" Jesus replied, "You do not understand now what I am doing, but one day you will." Peter said, "I will never let you wash my feet." "If I do not wash you," Jesus replied, "you are not in fellowship with me." "Then, Lord," said Simon Peter, "not my feet only. Wash my hands and head as well." Jesus said, "A man who is bathed needs no further washing. He is altogether clean, and you are clean, though not every one of you." He added the words, "not every one of you," because he knew he was going to betray him. After washing their feet and taking his garments again, he sat down. "Do you understand what I have done for you?" he asked. "You call me Master and Lord, and rightly so, for that is what I am. Then if I, your Lord and Master, have washed your feet, you also ought to wash one another's feet. I have set you an example. You are to do as I have done for you. In very truth, I tell you, a servant is not greater than his master, not a messenger than the one who sent him. If you know this, happy are you if you act upon it." That ends the reading.
This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God.
Thanks be to God.
Thanks be to God.
Thank you for reading that, Steve, and welcome, Sherry. It's good to have you here. So there's so much that is going on. So let's lay the table, figuratively and metaphorically. There's so much that is going on here. This is the Passover meal. This is for the Jewish Seder. So for those of you who may or may not know what is going on, I'm just going to go ahead and do a recap of what was going on and why Jesus was in the upper room and why they would have been gathering for this meal. And I'm curious, have any of you here experienced a Jewish Seder or spent time with anybody in the Jewish community and enjoyed a Passover meal with them? Okay. Even though I'm Presbyterian, at times I feel like I'm really Jewish because I love Jesus so much that I was like, if Jesus did this, then I really want to understand what Jesus went through. So I've had so many good friends that are rabbis in the community who have welcomed me to their Passover meals to experience this. And it is so beautiful and so powerful. And I feel so honored to talk about this and share about this experience with you. So the Passover meal talks about, it's all around the Israelites. So remember, they were slaves for 400 years in Egypt. And so now they're wandering around the desert for 40 years. But in order to get out of Egypt, Moses comes along and says, "Let my people go," right? So remember the Charlton Heston movie and remember that big moment, right? And so Pharaoh's heart keeps hardening over and over again. Have you ever met people whose hearts harden over and over again and you just can't get through to them? And this is a person in power, and it's about politics, and it's about abuse. And why would he want to give up all these slaves? He doesn't want to do this. But then what happens is that his life becomes so miserable that after a while he's like, enough, okay? So sort of the best way that I always do this is through like a children's book. So I remember getting this for my daughter when she was a little girl. And this is my book of the Passover Seder. So this is what happens. In Jewish families, even today, they will make plates like this, all right? So you see the different things. So like you see the egg, right? So the egg represents fertility. And I have my table set right here. So I have my egg, okay? And then you have a lamb shank bone. And that represents the Passover lamb. So I didn't have a lamb shank, so I had this, right? Then you have parsley down here, and that's bitter herb. Remember the bitterness that they're going through. And then you have greenery right here, and that's to represent the hope that they're wanting to have in the promised land. And then in the center, you see like the bitterness, that's horseradish. Okay, so you have horseradish, and then you have a thing that's called haroset, and that's right here by my hands right here. And haroset is sliced up apples, and it's really good. You can put like cinnamon in it and everything, but that's to represent the straw that the Israelites had to use in order to make bricks that they were doing with mud, but Pharaoh would not allow straw to be put into it, so that they had to work even harder and harder. Like they were just completely abused, right? So you have this book. So you set the plate. This is exactly the meal that Jesus would have been having on that night during that communion service. And it would have been remembering the time that the Israelites were slaves in Egypt, and they were trying to get out of it. So then what happens is they pour 4 cups of wine throughout the night. So there's a lot of drinking that happens at these parties. And you leave a chair open for Elijah. Okay. So you can have everyone around, and then you have an empty chair for Elijah, because Elijah is supposed to, come in and sit down and be, even though Elijah's not physically here, he's like, sitting with us at the Jewish Seder. And then it's really funny because at other Seders that I've been at, they've put a glass of wine in front of Elijah's, space, in front of his plate. And then like I would see the rabbi take the glass of wine and pour it into somebody else's glass, or something like that. And the little kids come up and go, oh my gosh, Elijah's cup. Elijah was here and just drank the wine, and so they do kind of, fun things like that. But you drink 4 cups of wine throughout the night. But then on some of those, you lean to your left, or I'll lean this way because then it looks like I'm leaning that way, right? You lean to your left. And when you lean to your left and then you drink, you have to specifically do that because it's like you're reclining. Because if you're a slave, you can't recline. But if you are free, then you can recline. Okay? So that's when you hear, like maybe, John leaning on Jesus' breast or something like that during the Last Supper. It's because they're drinking that cup of wine and leaning to the left. Okay? So then there's another thing that happens is you wash your hands, it's all very symbolic. There's a lot of symbology in it. Another point, what you do is you take water and you put a ton of salt in the water. And what do you think that salt represents? It represents tears. Okay. So then at one point, what you do is you take the parsley and you dip it in the salt water and you eat it. And it's like really salty, so that you can remember the tears that all of the Israelites were shedding while they were in slavery. And then, so I'm looking at my little kid book, right? So I'm going through this little book that I'm looking at, right? So then you also have the afkomen, and the afkomen is the bread that is not raised, right? So the unleavened bread. And why is it unleavened? Is because when they're in the deserts, they couldn't wait for the bread to rise. They had to eat it because they're always on the go. Okay, so that's why it's matzah. That's why it's flat. Then you have the afkomen, and you break that in half. You put it in different places around the room because you're saving it for Elijah. And then sometimes the kids can look for it. So instead of like an Easter egg hunt, they do an afkomen hunt. So they go searching for the matzah around the room. And then they go through a whole thing of we were slaves. We tell of the tale of 400 years when our people were slaves through sweat and tears. We all say, let all who are hungry come and eat. To whom would you like to offer a seat? So then you also, not only do you drink 4 glasses of wine, so cheers, right? You drink your 4 glasses of wine. There's also 4 questions that are asked. And it's always the one that's the youngest that asks the questions. And so the youngest at the table, they'll ask, why is it that we have the different foods? Why is it that we're dipping twice and sitting free, meaning we're leaning to the left? Why is it, why is this night? This is what, so, and you'll hear about this in the, Charlton Heston movie. Why is this night different from all other nights? So that's what our Jewish brothers and sisters will be saying during this time. Okay. So why is this night different from all other nights? So then another thing that they will do is that they'll take a plate and then they will dip their fingers in the wine and then dip it on the plate. So you get 10 different dots of wine on the plate. And what do you think those 10 different dots represent? Think about the Charlton Heston movie. There's 10 different
commandments.
Plagues.
Oh,
okay.
plagues.
Remember the plagues that come in? So you're remembering the plagues. So, and it's so funny because I've been to like some of these seders with some of my, rabbi friends at their synagogues. If you can believe it, a company has made stuffed little toys of the 10 plagues. So little kids will run around tossing the plagues around in the air. Okay. So let's go ahead and we'll just name the different plagues. Okay. So we have the blood. So remember the Nile? Remember when the staff is put into the Nile and then suddenly it turns to blood? Remember that? And talk about the movie if you've seen it. Frogs. All these frogs came in. So lice, swarms. So that would probably be like that. Yeah, that would probably be insects. The cattle. Remember all the cattle started dying? Boils. Hail. Remember that scene in the movie when the hail comes down and turns into fire? Hail. Locusts. Darkness. And the death of the firstborn. Okay. So those are the 10 plagues that the Israelites were praying that they would not get. So it's so funny when I talk to my colleague, she said, it is so crazy during this time of a pandemic that we're praying not to get this. They were praying not to get this plague. And here we are all these years later, praying that we don't get this plague during this pandemic. And so she's like, praying not to get sick in a time of a place of trying not to get sick. She said, it cannot get more Jewish than that. Okay. So here we are in a time of all this. Their vaccine at the time was the Passover lamb. Because God said, if you just put the blood of the lamb over the doors, along the door frames and over the top hinge, then the death will pass over you and the firstborn in your house will not die. That's why Jesus says, I am the Lamb of God, the Passover lamb. That's where Jesus being on the cross is death passing over us. Okay. And that's where Jesus is saying, I am the final sacrifice that's ever needed. So you don't need to keep doing this over and over. So that's where Jesus is saying, I am the Passover lamb. That's where we get that. Okay. So I went through all the different foods and what that means. And so then what's really interesting is with the haroset, that to me, that's the most interesting part, is that you get some of the matzah and then you put horseradish on it. And then you put the apples on it as well. And then you put a little bit of lamb on top of that. And it's a really interesting combination of flavors. But that's something that you do together. You have this big conversation, you go through a ritual, and then everyone can eat. And then everyone starts feasting. And then we have like a last toast to Elijah to say, and then you say, then this time next year, may we all be in Israel. And then that closes out the meal. So Jesus would have done all of that. He would have gone through all that. This is the first time I'm thinking about this. At the table of the Last Supper, they would have had a seat open for Elijah. It's interesting. That's not painted into the Last Supper painting. So here they are. They're all gathered together. And here's one of the things that I find so interesting. Sorry, I just have a little bit of parsley. Is that Jesus then got up and took a towel and started washing the feet of everyone there. The meal was already in progress. There would have been a servant always in the tradition to wash the feet of everyone before they ate, right? Because it's all dusty. They would have been out in the streets. Somebody would have washed their feet. Somebody would have done it. And here's the deal. No servant was there to wash the feet. And the meal is well on its way. And then Jesus gets up finally to wash the feet of everyone there. If I was Jesus, I would have been like, you all have been with me for 3 years. And the water basin is right there. The water jars are right there. Seriously, none of you are getting up to wash each other's feet. I could imagine he would have been a little crushed by that. But anyway, he just still went on with it, and he modeled. He modeled for them how to serve. And if you want to follow me, then this is what you have to do. Serve one another. Be humble enough to wash each other's feet. And then Peter wants to get into a whole thing and all that stuff. And Jesus is like, oh my gosh, Peter, enough. Enough. You're missing the bigger picture. Just serve one another. So imagine all of the food, the haroset, the horseradish, the hard-boiled eggs all around the table. The matzah that's probably just laying on the table. And then Jesus would have said, also, this is my body, broken for you. Eat this in remembrance of me. And he would have passed it around to them, and they would have eaten. And then he would have said, and also, this is my blood poured out for you. Drink this in remembrance of me. And they would have drank of it as well. Imagine the confusion they would have had. This is your body? This is your blood? What? He was trying to let them know that he knew his time was near. And Judas knew exactly what was going on. Judas knew totally what was going on. One of you here will betray me. No, could it be me? Could it be me? Judas says, is it me? And he's like, go quickly and do what you must have to do. Imagine what that would have been like for Jesus, knowing that and allowing it. Jesus could have run. He could have hid. He had all the political power behind him to get an insurrection going, an uprising. He had momentum, and yet still he chose to go to the cross. That's amazing to me. And it's because he chose to humble himself and chose to take this path that we're still talking about him all these thousands of years later. What he was trying to show was love in the face of hate, love in the face of torture, love in an institution and politics that was going down a wrong path. He was still showing love in the midst of world hatred and political power. He was trying to show something even all the better. So, my friends, are you ready to grab your bits of food? And if not, you can symbolically just take and eat. And think about that time. Think about the room, what it might have looked like, the table with everything scattered all over it. Maybe the disciples are a bit drunk because they've had 4 glasses of wine. Maybe they're like, wow, Palm Sunday was so great. Wasn't that wonderful? And how quickly things turned. So imagine all of that. And Jesus sitting there after your feet are washed. And Jesus, on the night that Jesus was betrayed, he took the bread, and after he blessed it, he broke it, saying, "This is my body, broken for you. Eat this in remembrance of me." In the same manner, he took the cup, saying, "This is the cup of the new covenant, my blood poured out for all of you. Drink this in remembrance of me." Would you please pray with me? Loving God, on this night of holiest of nights, when we remember the Last Supper, when we remember the time when all the disciples gathered in the upper room, may we too know that we too are your disciples, and we are gathering in our own upper room right now in this Zoom room. May this Zoom room be reminiscent of that time, thousands of years ago, when people of faith gathered together around this teacher, the one who shows a path to love and grace, forgiveness and hope. May we too have a time of learning and leaning into our freedom, knowing that we are no longer slaves, but new altogether in you. Gracious and loving God, during this time of this pandemic, as we pray for those who have lost their lives and for those who are sick, may we know that yet even though we may have lost some loved ones, that death is not the final word. As you say, death, where is thy sting? Loving God, may we be reminded that as Jesus chose this path to the cross, may we know that we can only find transformation when we need to sometimes let go of things and find transformation in you. May we on this Maundy, Thursday, be reminded of this greatest love of your Son, Jesus Christ, who taught us to pray, saying, "Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our debts, as we forgive our debtors. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, and the power, and the glory forever. Amen." Amen.
And
All right. Well, my friends, this concludes our time together. but I would like just to hear, if you feel like it, please feel free to stay on. But I'd like to hear what this experience was like for you, if you learned anything new. Hello.
This is May. It was all new to me. I have never attended Maundy Thursday or understood what the Last Supper, I think I wasn't like Wade all brought up, so this was all new and very educational.
Great. Glad to hear that.
Yeah, it was new to me for this Maundy Thursday. I've gone to Good Friday. I participated in 1 or 2 feet washings, but not as part of Maundy Thursday.
Okay.
Thank you for explaining the Seder dinner and all the different elements of that meant. That was really very, very helpful and enlightening.
Great. Yeah, I think Parkview would really benefit, one of these years by not only experiencing, doing one yourselves, but going to a synagogue and participating. And, I've had so many great experiences with rabbis, taking like my family or my daughter or my sister with me, or, it's really quite lovely. So, yeah.
Is the Seder meal usually a family thing at a home, or is it at a synagogue?
Both.
Oh, okay.
There's usually one at a synagogue and there's one in a home. And they do it 2 nights in a row in the United States, for example. The reason they do it 2 nights in a row is so that at least you'll be a part of that 24-hour experience somewhere, sometime in Israel. But in Israel, they just do it 1 night because you're in, you're in the hometown. So that's why you always say, hopefully next year in Israel. But in the United States, that's why there's 2. Yeah, so sometimes you can be in someone's home, or I've experienced both. I've been able to experience it. I've experienced it at B'nai Israel and Mosaic Hall here in Sacramento. Yeah. Anybody else? Steve or William or Sherry or Victor or Wade?
But thank you. It was very intimate. When I would think the dinner was fairly intimate for Jesus and the disciples. And because of, we have this small turnout, and it was sort of like Jesus telling us the story behind it and everything.
Yeah, it's perfect. Yeah. And that's why everyone was coming into Jerusalem. That's why it was so packed, is because everyone's cooking. Everyone's getting ready to eat. Yeah.
And a lot of drinking. 4 cups.
Much drinking. 4 glasses of wine.
You better make sure they're thimbles, huh?
You're right. Like I can drink this much and be like, woo, imagine. And it's interesting because sometimes when I do these things, I go, oh yeah. After 4 glasses, they were probably pretty drunk. And then Jesus is going to the garden saying, stay awake with me, pray with me. And they're probably like, I am so sloshed. They're probably like, I'm so drunk right now. Like, okay, Jesus, we're with you. Oh, but he's like, he probably wasn't sipping much because he's like so full of anxiety, right?
Oh, do you think that actually is a feasible explanation of why nobody could stay up with Jesus?
I think that's one thing, but sometimes if you've been in they come into Jerusalem, imagine what it would have been like on Palm Sunday. Thousands of people out, there would have been like so much adrenaline. And then throughout the week, people keep coming to them saying, we want to talk to Jesus, because he's like a rock star, right? We want to talk to Jesus. We want to talk to Jesus. We want to talk to Jesus. They're probably just tired. And then they're getting ready for the Passover. I think, but who isn't tired at 4 a.m, right? But after I kind of went through this going, oh yeah, they drank 4 glasses of wine. I have a hard time sometimes staying awake after like this much, you know? So that's one thing. But the other thing was holding a table, a seat open for Elijah. I was like, oh, that's an interesting thought. You know, like at the table, they would have been, you know, and I'm sure they would have been joking around, hey, Elijah, how are you doing? And all that stuff. And, you know, if you've seen the Saturday Night Live skit, it is so funny because what you're supposed to do is you open the door, you send one of the kids, hey, kids, you know, one of you go open the door so that you can let Elijah in. And there's no one at the door, right? Well, in the Saturday Night Live skit, the kid opens the door and there's Jerry Seinfeld dressed like a prophet. And it's Elijah. And they go, oh my gosh, Elijah just showed up. They bring Elijah in and he sits at the table. And it is one of the funniest skits I've ever seen. Yeah. And so Elijah does, you know, it's Jerry Seinfeld. And then at the end of the skit, Elijah goes and opens the door and it's Jesus. And they're both like, hey, my friend. And so, yeah, it's just kind of funny.
So Elijah is a prophet, right?
Right.
And the only time I've ever heard, you know, the Who, Tommy sings Elijah coming. I mean, that's the only thing I can.
So the reason why we have Elijah in there, because he's the only other person in the Bible who floats up into the sky. Okay. So that's why. So we hear about Elijah and Jesus ascending into heaven. So that's why Elijah shows up. Because we still feel like his presence is around.
I have a question. So the Seder concludes for the Jewish faith. I mean, that's it for the rest of the year. So what was on schedule for the next day for Jesus? Was there anything happening? I mean, I'm not talking about the crucifixion and everything.
Right. You're just talking about in the Jewish schedule?
Yeah. You know.
Yeah, no, there was nothing scheduled. At that point, everyone would have been packing up and going home because everyone did their bit, you know, and it's like next year in Jerusalem, let's meet in Israel. They were there, they were at the apex. And the Passover is like, you know, you have the high holy days and that happens in September, but the Passover, you know, and Jesus was strategic. This was not like, oh, it just happened on this day. Jesus specifically planned to go to Jerusalem so that he could symbolically show everyone that he was the Passover lamb. Okay? It wasn't like, oh, it's just happenstance. And it's when he was going to have most advertising because it was going to be the time when there are going to be the most people in the city. So yeah, it was, he thought it through. I think about Jesus a lot. He thought it through. But imagine, you know, like we talk about this as we make our way to Jerusalem during this time of Lent. I mean, imagine what he did. He chose to go. He knew exactly what was going to happen. He knew it. I just find that amazing. So, yeah. Steve or Wade or Sherry or Victor, any thoughts?
Thanks for explaining it, because I do remember in New York when we used to have the Seder dinners there, you know, we were college and all of that. We remember more just drinking all the wine than anything else. Or, you know, I mean, they had the prayers and, you know, they were saying it in Hebrew and all of that. But we just, you know, went through the motions and ate everything and for sure drank the wine. But yeah, at the end of the dinner, we were pretty happy there. But yeah, it did come all into play right now.
And Seth Castleman, he's the rabbi that gave the message, you know, he sent his greetings at the prayer vigil because he wasn't able to come. But he has, and so just know that the Seder happened over the weekend. I think it happened Saturday night and Sunday night. So that's also why he couldn't be there on Friday, because not only was it Shabbat, but it was also Passover weekend, right? And just know that this is always done because of the moon. So I think it's a full moon right now, right? So whenever it's always done because of the moon. So that's why Easter is always changing, and that's why Passover is always changing. And Passover and Easter always coincide together. So he has an interfaith Seder traditionally that happens. It's like either a month before or a month after, just so that the Jewish community can be able to focus on their family or at their synagogue. But I've done it where it's an interfaith service where you have like the Mormon faith, Catholic faith, whole eclectic imams, pretty much what you would have seen at our prayer vigil. It would have been something similar to that, where everyone together is doing this, and then a bunch of rabbis are leading the Seder for everyone. So, yeah, it's always good to be in understanding and community with one another. And here's the thing, Jesus did this, and so that's why I've connected with my Jewish brothers and sisters so much, is because I love Jesus, and I've just really wanted to understand whatever he went through. I've wanted to understand. But it's so funny. I cannot tell you how many rabbis have tried to convert me. So many. And they've said, like my friend Rabbi Taff, he's like, come home. Just come home. Go to rabbinic school. Just come home. And I go, yeah. And I said, but if it wasn't for this Jesus thing, I'd be right there. So, yeah. Anyway, the Jewish community holds a very special spot in my heart. So Steve or Victor or Sherry, anything?
Well, do you think that Jesus came up with this plan, or do you think that God discussed it with him when he was on the mountaintop with his apostles and Elijah and Moses?
I think Jesus got a pretty clear picture at that time. He's talking about the Transfiguration, Transfiguration Sunday. So yeah, I absolutely think Jesus knew exactly the path he was taking.
Yeah.
And Sherry?
Oh, I just am like the others. I found it to be very interesting. I mean, we've all, know about the Last Supper, but we really don't. And I was surprised how many of us didn't know the background of it. So it was quite interesting. And, we do have Jewish friends, but we really don't interact with them on a religious basis. It's interesting.
Yeah. And I'm just even thinking about, like, on the table, there would have been like eggshells all over the table, I just kind of think about these things as they would have been peeling things and all that. So, and I just find it fascinating that this happened thousands and thousands of years ago, and yet we're still talking about this story today. So yeah, it's all about trying to find freedom, no longer being slaves, finding freedom, and living into that we do not have to be slaves to anything or to anyone, that we can find our hope and by being in the presence of God. So yeah, may we live as free people.
Thank you.
Anything else? Any other last thoughts? All right.
Thanks again.
Peace be with you. We'll see you
Thank
tomorrow
you.
night, 7 p.m.
Tomorrow night.
Tomorrow night.
Good night.
All right.
Good night.
Okay. Bye.
Bye.